I just had the misfortune of watching Scream 7, so you don't have to. It's safe to say I've been a staunch defender of this new Scream trilogy so far, with 2022's Scream and 2023's Scream 6 taking the franchise into genuine new directions and covering some really interesting ground. The directing trio known as Radio Silence breathed new life into Scream by carrying on Wes Craven's penchant for smart meta-commentary and uncovering how to tailor it toward the current state of pop culture, directing it towards toxic fandom and the trends of recent hollow legacy sequels. In the aftermath of the rising wave of legacy sequels, in particular the Star Wars sequel trilogy and the new Halloween trilogy, they took aim at fan entitlement and the refusal to engage with a piece of media that doesn't serve them, and retaliated when they didn't get what they wanted, going so far as to attack the creators and actors involved. Scream 6 takes this idea, but shifts the focus from toxic film fanatics to true crime obsessives and how they trivialize real traumatic events that happen to real people. It's about survivors learning to reclaim their agency in the matter, taking the mask from their killer and making it their own. That's why it's so smart that the film is about Ghostface, in a sense. As similar to the first film, it's showing us the bad thing in order to cut it down and make its point. It's also about how narratives surrounding true crime events are rarely as cut and dry as they seem. There's so much complexity and nuance that gets lost as opportunists try to collect and present the pieces that make the best narrative. No one is actually interested in the truth, just the truth that sells. Legacy is not defined by your lineage, but sometimes your lineage can have an effect on your legacy, and it's up to you to reclaim it. Reclaim the narrative. So yeah, I was really loving this new Scream trilogy so far, but a hell of a lot has happened in the time between Scream 6 and Scream 7, which took me from highly anticipating this third act a few years ago to now really unenthusiastic, to put it kindly, about this installment, to the point where I was kind of considering not watching it at all. But alas, I did, and as expected, yeah, it's fucking terrible. With a script straight out of a soap opera and a visual style taken from the latest NBC primetime drama, and that's kind of an insult to those dramas to be, to give them credit. Scream 7 amounts to nothing more than a hollow, frankly embarrassing entry in the franchise that not only corrects a course that didn't need to be corrected by literally setting fire to the threads of the previous two films, but also abandons the unique spirit of the franchise, becoming antithetical to all of its predecessors. This video is going to be kind of a weird one because it's going to be kind of a cultural piece, just talking about the things that led to this film being what it wound up being. And then, yeah, I'm also going to review parts of the film towards the back half of it, but it's just, when you're talking about Scream 7, there's just kind of, it's a mess. There's no real clean way to talk about this film, so I'm just going to talk about it the way that I see fit. Because honestly, I want to dive into how and why this film failed in the first place, and look at the cultural shifts that have led us to this point. While I was disgusted by the actions of Paramount and Spyglass towards Melissa Barrera, I was truthfully open to receiving this film when I sat down in the theater and see if the creatives involved could redeem the project. But instead of overcoming the unpleasantness surrounding its creation, it unforgivably leans into it further in a way that I could never bring myself to endorse. So let's explore how we got into this mess, how the past 3 years of chaos behind the scenes at Paramount and Spyglass have led to boycotts and disinterest for both moral reasons and due to an inevitable decline in quality, and why I watched Scream 7 so you don't have to. As I highlighted in my previous videos, one of my favorite parts of these new Scream movies so far has been their willingness to refresh the lineup of characters and really put their trust into the new blood. Melissa Barrera's Sam Carpenter and Jenna Ortega's Tara Carpenter were a real breath of fresh air, and I was so excited to see their story continue in the next Scream film. But it's safe to say that Paramount and Spyglass firmly put the kibosh on that only a few months after Scream 6's release. In late 2023, Melissa Barrera was fired from Scream 7 as a result of comments she made in the wake of the October 7th attacks in Israel and Israel's subsequent retaliation, which has led to a wide number of leading scholars declaring that Israel's actions against Palestine constitute a genocide. While now, 3 years on, it's not uncommon to see high-profile celebrities like Mark Ruffalo or Susan Sarandon to passionately and openly speak in support of Palestine, Barrera was one of the earliest to use her platform to campaign for an end to Israel's genocide and for humanitarian aid to be provided to Palestinians. Spyglass and Paramount deemed her comments to be anti-Semitic, a wild misrepresentation of her comments, and one that conflates all Jewish people with the actions of Israel, which, as Barrera herself pointed out, is anti-Semitic in and of itself. The axing of Barrera set a dangerous precedent in an almost unofficial resurrection of McCarthyism, suppressing the free speech of artists and allowing studios to hold those artists and their careers to ransom in order to censor them. This is particularly the case not only with rising talent who may not hold the same power or reverence in industry circles as aforementioned powerhouse stars like Mark Ruffalo, because I mean, let's be real, you're not really gonna have an Avengers movie without the fucking Hulk in it, so I mean, he's kind of safe from any repercussions or reprisal, whatever the word is. Anyways, but particularly artists who come from marginalized backgrounds like Melissa Barrera, which has definitely seen an increase in the US as Trump's government seeks to silence powerful voices who may promote left-wing ideas or, in this case, anti-Zionist views. Now, and even less than a year after this happened, many other big stars had spoken out as things continue to escalate in Gaza, and it feels highly unlikely that Melissa Barrera's career would have suffered in the same way as it takes those with the largest platforms and most secure careers, those who genuinely hold an immense amount of pressure over these studios to step up and lead by example. It speaks volumes to Barrera's character that she instantly took that stance, knowing that those paths hadn't yet been ground out by her more established peers with less to lose, who are held to a higher value in the industry because of institutional biases and bigotry. It begs the question, if Courtney Cox, for example, was the one to speak out, would she have faced the same treatment? I highly doubt it. Alongside these wider ramifications, it also set into action a chain of events that led us to this version of Scream 7. Jenna Ortega was confirmed to have left the project just one day after Barrera's firing, with initial reports indicating that this was due to scheduling conflicts with Wednesday. However, none of us really believed that was the case, and Ortega later set the record straight, clarifying what we all suspected, which was that her exit had nothing to do with scheduling or pay, but was due to her recognizing that everything was falling apart behind the scenes. With Barrera's sacking and radio silence handing directing duties to Christopher Landon due to actual scheduling conflicts, she had no desire to continue with a creative team that was steadily becoming unrecognizable from the previous two entries. It's safe to say that Ortega's stock has skyrocketed since her appearances in Scream, so amongst all the chaos, they've lost some huge star quality that could act as a massive draw for audiences. And the changes didn't stop there. All of this upheaval caused the new director, Christopher Landon, who honestly was a great replacement for radio silence given his work on the Happy Death Day films, to leave the project, acknowledging after the fact that the changes caused by Barrera and Ortega's exits left the film in a state so far removed from what he signed on to make, he felt no reason to continue. And honestly, who could blame him? In 2026, we're used to films struggling through chaotic productions due to studio interference, creative differences, rewrites, or reshoots. But Scream 7 evolved, or devolved, into an entirely different project in such a short space of time, it would have been a miracle if it just came out entirely unscathed. In the span of just 4 months, the film changed directors twice, lost its two lead actors, abandoned all the plot threads from the previous two installments, and left the series scrambling for a new direction. And seemingly the direction they chose was backwards, in a move that can only really be described as utterly desperate. Spyglass and Paramount went back to Neve Campbell with their tails between their legs. Campbell famously turned down the chance to appear in Scream 6, the first Scream movie not to feature Sidney Prescott, as she deemed the salary on offer to be below the value she brought to the franchise, and noted that this wouldn't have happened if she were a man. This was a completely justifiable and valid decision I not only respected the hell out of at the time, but has since been proven right if you look at the box office receipts so far for Scream 7. It was an incredibly bold move that was widely praised by those in and around the industry, setting important boundaries and pushing back on the poor treatment of artists, and particularly female artists, from big studios. I wish she maintained this gumption when it came to Scream 7 and what they did to Melissa Barrera. But alas, that could be said for literally anyone involved in this film, and the fact that they decided to be a part of it after one of their colleagues was just kind of used as a scapegoat and left out to dry, and basically, had her career tarnished for something that was morally right. It just insane stuff. And so, yeah, while I had respect for Neve Campbell for what she did on Scream 6, I lost a lot of respect for her for coming back and agreeing to do Scream 7. But I digress. At the time, this was rather disappointing for fans, and I get it, right? Scream without Sidney Prescott. Is it actually Scream? Will it work? Well, it turns out it can work. It could work out pretty damn well, and it worked out just fine without her. I actually thought this decision was to the benefit of Scream 6, and that moving on, albeit only partially, from these legacy characters made sense, given the themes explored in the previous film, and it allowed for more time to be invested in this new generation of characters. Like Scream did back in the 90s, the 2022 sequel managed to bring together an incredible ensemble of rising talent to take the series onwards, including Barrera, Ortega, Jack Quaid, an eventual Oscar winner, Mikey Madison. That's why I was so disappointed when it was confirmed that not only Neve Campbell, but a whole host of characters from previous films would be returning alongside the usual suspects, Roger Jackson and Courtney Cox. The huge problem running throughout this whole film is that all these cameos and callbacks and connections to obscure side characters who died in the previous films have no real weight behind them. Not just because it's blatantly a cynical cash grab and a desperate attempt at nostalgia bait, but because the prior two movies skewered these very moves and subverted them in the way Scream should. People will be quick to point to Skeet Ulrich's inclusion as Billy Loomis in the 5th and 6th films as an example of pandering to fan service, but I think the key difference is that he's used to both subvert expectations within the franchise itself around lineage and legacy, but serves as a key part of Sam's character development across the two films. He was also dead. It's not like they were resurrecting him and bringing him back. Like, he was a ghost for practically the whole time, and I think there's something interesting about a character like Sam who doesn't really understand who her father is, but is very much aware of all the bad things he's done and trying to grapple with that. And also the fact that her grandmother, I guess, is also a serial killer. Like, clearly this is something that has poisoned this lineage, and will she break free of it, or is it something that she will eventually succumb to? That's really interesting, and I think that's something the franchise was benefiting from with Scream 5 and 6. It wasn't just rehashing the Sidney plotline. We kind of moved on from that, and we were doing something that was in conversation with the larger idea of killers and killer worship. It's just... And of course we abandoned that. Of course we did. Yeah. But in Scream 7, you just have an entourage of recognizable faces wheeled out for brand recognition and a flimsy AI commentary that's putting it kindly, that barely gets off the ground, while the real killer behind it all holds no actual emotional connection or significance to any of the characters or the narrative. And yeah, I get it. They're used in like one scene for like half a second, a blink and you'll miss it kind of cameo, but that kind of points to a larger issue that I have with Scream 7 that we'll get into a little bit later on. Overall, Scream 7 is just bringing back characters and dining out on what little weight they have while trying to mock the idea of indulging in the past and giving it that reverence, leading to the whole thing becoming a contradiction. The opening scene is entirely disconnected from the main narrative, like most opening scenes, but goes on to hold absolutely no importance, not even a loose connection to the main plot. Instead, it plays with this idea that Kevin Williamson wants to burn it all down, burn down the franchise he helped build in order to construct something new. I don't know, which just kind of acts as a tagline for the film, but then, like, he doesn't do it. He doesn't follow through, and that's the biggest problem with Scream 7. Scream has always been meta, with the existence of the Stab franchise within the canon already taking this to an extreme. But being self-aware doesn't excuse poor filmmaking or desperation, and the Scream franchise has evidently gone so far past meta, it's collapsed in on itself and fully become the thing it's previously mocked. I mean, all throughout the build-up to this film's release, you could feel the tug of war between the tongue-in-cheek self-awareness and the blatant shame coming through the promotional material, with the voiceover on the trailer dropping the 7 while the logo on screen proudly displaying it. You already mocked the whole legacy sequel that calls itself the same name as the first movie in 2022. You can't really pull the same trick twice in order to have your cake and eat it too. It feels like a movie looking to ride on its name alone to drag in audiences with no interest in actually acting like a Scream movie. And that's before we get into into the god-awful cross-promotion with Meta AI, which allowed fans to insert themselves into scenes from the film using generative AI, which is fucking disgusting. And especially so given that the film crowbars in a half-baked twist based around the abuse of generative AI and the dangers of being able to make anyone say anything on video and like, oh, what's fake? What's real? I don't know. Who knows? It all feels baffling in that they'd use that very same technology in such a gimmicky way to try and promote the film. It's the kind of thing we saw mocked back in Scream 2 with the promotional ghost face masks for being exploitative and gross, and shows just how much Scream 7 misunderstands Craven's work. Now, look, while I've expressed my dissatisfaction with Neve Campbell returning to the series after everything that went down behind the scenes, I can't really blame her for securing that huge bag and capitalizing on Spyglass and Paramount's unparalleled run of consecutive fuck-ups. And like, good for her. If you're gonna do this, just get your money and run and pray to God they don't make a Scream 8. But I guess they are making a Scream 8, so fuck you, you're stuck. I have to wonder, though, whether it was all worth it to essentially partake in a project that points inwards so far, that derides not only your colleagues and the previous two entries, but also mocks you and the important stance you took against corporate studio greed and gender pay gaps. The film infers that Scream 6 would have been a better film with Sidney, even though they refused to cough up the money to secure her, and they're piling on a film that was successful and well received thanks to it having a much more interesting and entertaining premise than this tepid, bland impression of a Scream sequel. Given what happened with Melissa Barrera and the way the studio left her out in the cold just for taking a stand on something she believes in, it leaves a really sour taste in the mouth that this movie goes so far out of its way to shit on the movies she led out of pure spite, when it could have just focused on continuing the great story they had or telling something fresh and new away from that if the creative team's hands were really as forced as it seemed that they were. Although, I mean, they weren't really that forced. It was an unforced error that caused this movie to exist in the way that it did. So, I don't know, man. I don't have any sympathy for this shit. But most of all, it's kind of insane that the movie makes Sidney apologize for not being around for the events of Scream 6 and implying she's selfish, clearly riffing off the real-world events around her absence. And it takes this to a whole new level of distasteful and borders on becoming a humiliation ritual for Neve Campbell. While the threads of moving on from trauma and getting on with your life could have been carried over from Scream 6, instead, the movie has Sidney, or Neve, apologize for not being there, for being selfish, even though she fucking moved on with her life in the previous two films. The whole movie feels like it's trying to be about the need for legacy sequels to bring back legacy characters because they're only allowed to be the people we remember from long ago, that they are only their trauma or the hero we remember from our youth, and when they reject that, well, they've betrayed the fans. That's literally the motivation of the killer, Sidney's neighbor who read her book and found the help she needed to break free of her abusive relationship with her husband through this idolization and parasocial relationship she formed with Sidney. The neighbor has disdain for Sidney not being in New York for the Ghostface attack, therefore betraying her trust and proving to be a false idol, which then causes her to want to turn Sidney's daughter into a revamped version of Sidney 2.0, as she puts it. This is all well and good, and seemingly in line with the Legacy trilogy's commentary on the unrealistic and unhealthy obsession fans have with their version of the truth or reality. However, aside from it coming out of nowhere in the climax of a film that's primarily been a shallow story about a mother's trauma creating friction and distance between her and her daughter, like in Halloween 2018, Kevin Williamson and company note this cynical perception surrounding franchises only to damn Sidney to a similar fate. The movie makes hollow critiques only to indulge in the exact thing it's criticizing, having Sidney come back as this grizzled legacy character with trauma that's been addressed multiple times by this point in the series, reciting lines, iconic or otherwise, from Scream's past, as it also recycles ideas already explored as recently as Scream 5 and 6. It then criminally has Neve cede to the killers of the film in the end, admitting she was selfish and wrong for not being in Scream 6, even though she has a fucking family and kids and rightfully has no business endangering hers or their lives by venturing to New York City where a killer is on the loose. She apologizes to Gail and everyone, I guess, the audience, for being selfish and not being a woman who helps women, even though she literally wrote a book that helped people. Granted that one of the people it helped ended up being a fucking killer, but clearly the message of her experiences and strength got through to them, even if they misconstrued it. It ends with Sidney reclaiming her place as the badass series lead, forever defined by her trauma, unable to move past it for the sake of audience gratification. None of this works because it's contradictory. The film clearly is aware of a trend with legacy sequels, but doesn't have the strength to address it, and that's because Sidney, as a character, isn't the same as Laurie Strode or Luke Skywalker or whoever the fuck. She's managed to move on with her life in a healthy way, has made peace with her trauma, and isn't letting it rule her life. Yet, the film insists that it is, having her make decisions or act in ways that feel out of character, or have other characters react to what she's doing as being wrong and irrational when it really isn't. It becomes antithetical to her entire ethos, which makes sense when the filmmakers have made a film that's entirely antithetical to the entire ethos of Scream. Scream 7 wants the hype moments, the glup shittos, and the shameless nostalgia porn only a legacy sequel can provide, but is also acutely aware that it's a Scream movie, and the name stands in opposition to the very thing it so desperately wants to rest on. The filmmakers think that by lampshading, they can get away with it, but lampshading requires walking a very fine line, and tends to not work that well when you're guilty of practicing the very thing you're critiquing. This is embarrassingly obvious with Scream 7, a film that wants to be in vogue while critiquing what exactly is in vogue at this current cultural moment. One of the new additions to Sidney's character comes in the form of her strained relationship with her daughter, Tatum, which just comes off as shallow given there's no attempts to give any clarity or understanding as to why their relationship is like this in the first place. There's no real status quo for their relationship and how it's kind of devolved over the years. This is clearly a shameless riff off of Halloween 2018, but it lacks all of the nuance, all of the generational trauma and pain that the matriarch has inflicted onto her children and how that's been passed down. It also doesn't work because, again, Sidney Prescott isn't Laurie Strode. The last time we saw Sidney, she's pretty well adjusted to her civilian life, whereas the last time we saw Laurie Strode, given that it's a sequel to the original Halloween, I mean, she saw some pretty dark shit, and clearly, that movie being the way it was, that character hasn't been able to move past it and has really only fortified herself, fallen inwards, and been paranoid and created such a toxic environment for her children. We don't really see that with Sidney, and to ascribe all of that to Sidney, I think misses the progress that she's kind of gone through, the healing that she's gone through since that first encounter. Even the second encounter with Ghostface is dealing with trauma in some regard, and she kind of was able to work through that. In Scream 7, we're told that Sidney doesn't like to talk about her trauma, despite being happy to share it with other victims and write a whole book about it, and the film never explores why this is the case, despite there being real potential for interesting character work there. Conversely, Tatum herself has a confusing reaction to all of this, particularly when it comes to the origins of her name, being named after Sidney's friend and Dewey's sister from the first film, who gets killed in the garage door. Tatum. Yeah, Scream got its glup shitto. If you're like me and you heard Tatum and you were like, who the fuck is Tatum? And it's like, oh, it's Rose McGowan's character from the fucking first movie. Haven't thought about that character since, the first time I saw that film, so what a pull. What a pull from Kevin Williamson there. Insane. But what's even more insane is that Tatum assumes Sidney named her after Tatum because they're both weak. And while I get she's an irrational teenager with low self-esteem and struggling to exist outside the shadow cast by her mom, it's a ridiculous leap in logic to go from, you were named after my friend Tatum, to, oh, so you named me after your dead friend because you think I'm a weak victim, you think that I'm hopeless, that I don't stand a chance. It's like, when you were born, girl, like, do you really think your mom was thinking about, oh, this girl's gonna turn out to be a weak bitch, and that's why I'm gonna name, like, what the fuck? It's just, why? That's such like a straw man, like, This also leads to a lot of strange over-aggrandizing of Tatum as a character, placing her on this fucking pedestal as if she's some key figure in the franchise, when she's barely been fucking mentioned since her death in the first film. Sidney ascribes all these strong and inspiring traits to her that helped her become Sidney Prescott as we know her, and these are all traits that are never seen on screen from this character, and we're the ones left to try and assume all of this impact and history Tatum had on Sidney after all these years. It doesn't play with the concept that Tatum hasn't been brought up as it's an element of Sidney's trauma that remains unresolved. It builds her up to be something she wasn't, molding her to fit the story Williamson wants to tell, regardless of whether it contrasts with what we've seen on screen or the essence of the characters. I think the idea of Tatum is kind of ridiculous to begin with, but if you're going to go down that route, at least try to make it interesting and effective. The film feels like a soap opera because all of the grievances between Sidney and her daughter are over-dramatized and superficial. Not to mention the dialogue is so fucking stiff and wooden that it makes both actors, who I don't think are bad actors, look terrible. The issues aren't exclusive to Sidney and her daughter either, as the characterization of most of the returning players who aren't deepfakes is butchered too. Gale is, like Sidney, dragged back to the idea of what Gale should be based on fan memories and reverence for the original, ignoring the events that have happened in universe and the development she's gone through in the intervening films. I mean, why is she still chasing Sidney for an interview? That's embarrassing. This woman is your friend. Gale's written her books. Even Sidney has written a book about it. There's countless films about her experiences, and we've been over this countless times in the series already. What is this interview going to provide her that's being friends with Sidney hasn't? Because, I mean, clearly the whole film is building to this thing where Sidney's like, you know what, Gale, you're right. I should have opened up and shared my pain with you so that we could have healed together and all this. And it's just like, you guys already did that. Like, this isn't some new revelation. You're trying to create drama where there really isn't any. Other than adding to this weird self-referential pile on Neve Campbell by having Gale interrogate Sidney about her absence in New York, why would this be a driving motivation for Gale? It just screams that the creative team felt she had to be in the film because she's a surviving legacy character and big-name actress, and had no desire to find her something interesting to do, so reverted her to her status quo. On the other side, the two carryovers from the radio silence days, Chad and Mindy, suffer from complete flanderization, and that is being generous with that one. I mean, they barely resemble Chad and Mindy from those two films. Their existing characterization is thrown out the fucking window and replaced by an unrecognizable caricature of who they are. It provides further evidence towards Williamson's blatant disregard and disrespect for the previous two films, and decided to contort them into what he needed, to the point where they may as well have been just two new characters. Like, why do they have to be Chad and Mindy? They have this strange attachment to Gale that comes out of nowhere. I mean, like, I get they're friends and I get they experienced something traumatic in the last film together, but why does that mean that they then are gonna go be her, like, I don't know, her entourage, right? Why are they gonna go and help her break the story? Like, the whole point of the last film was them calling Gale out on being exploitative and you know, using her power as a journalist in order to sensationalize murders and true crime narratives without actually shining a light on victims. And I mean, when it comes to Scream 7, they've kind of just forgotten that entirely because, oh, Gale's back. Also, while we're down this rabbit hole, there's something that happens in the film where the first Ghostface killer is killed, and this van comes in and it just like runs over the Ghostface, and it's like, whoa, and then out of the van pops Gale and Chad and Mindy, and then, you know, everyone in the audience is like, whoa, yeah. But it's like, it's another one of those things that you see in legacy sequels that is supposed to drum up fan enthusiasm, where like these nostalgia plays, these cameos, these legacy characters just come crashing into the narrative in some way, shape, or form in order to generate audience applause. And it is so cheap. It's so fucking stupid. It makes the whole thing feel like it's designed for reactions instead of, you know, being a compelling narrative. It's like, oh, come on, guys. Like, this is embarrassing. This is Scream, for God's sake. And that's the problem with Scream 7. It wants to be cynical of legacy sequels and nostalgia plays and, like, you know, bringing back these legacy characters in order for them to be what we remember them as. It's criticizing all of this, but then it's like indulging in those exact moments. It wants to have these triumphant moments where the hero that we remember is badass, or the legacy characters come crashing onto the scene, or like they're reciting old lines, or like old faces from the past. It's just, it's very in your face about the lineage of Scream, about the nostalgia porn. And so it doesn't really do either all that well. It causes the criticism to ring hollow because, like, yeah, okay, cool, you want to criticize all these things in the cynical state of franchise filmmaking, sure, that's all well and good, very Scream. But then you're going to indulge in all the same things that you get out of a legacy sequel, and therefore your whole mantra of burn it all down doesn't really land as strongly as you think it is, because you're like, yeah, sure, burn it all down, but not really, not quite. We're gonna use this over here and this over there. It's just, it's so stupid. It's a film that's like talking out of both sides of its mouth. And Williamson does all of this instead of continuing on the path that had already been laid down and had serious potential and was doing interesting things while making incisive commentary on the state of franchise filmmaking. In my previous 2 videos on Scream, I drew a lot of parallels to the Star Wars sequel trilogy and how the extreme overreactions from certain subsections of Star Wars fans informed Scream's mockery of fandom and entitlement. Sadly, it's impossible for me to not see this as Scream's Rise of Skywalker moment, from its butchered pre-production to its betrayal of the framework laid down by its predecessors thanks to pressure from real-world political movements and fan outcry. Even Stu's return as an AI deepfake feels uncannily similar to Palpatine's egregious return, born out of a need to pander to long-seated fan theories, despite both characters' stories being done, both being dead, and having no real need to enter the story. And I get that the whole point is that, oh, well, it's not really Stu, and the film is very critical of the fact that it's like, well, Stu's dead, this isn't actually true, which then why are you prolonging this whole thing? If we all know that it's not Stu, then why are you trying to lead us down this path? Like, it's just such an obvious red herring that no one is buying, and yet the film continues to indulge it because, oh hey, we can get Matthew Lillard in here to be Stu again, and we can indulge this fan theory that, oh, Stu survived at the end of Scream. It's just Scream 7, guys, I think it's killing me. When they had a perfect setup to move on from the past and really establish the next generation through something fresh and original, they shat the bed. It's an insult to Melissa Barrera, to Neve Campbell, to Jenna Ortega, anyone who's worked on the previous 2 films, and frankly, to the audience, who deserve a hell of a lot better than this. It's so fucking disappointing that after Radio Silence took Wes Craven's series and revitalized it for a new generation, even after Craven's 3rd and 4th installments failed to live up to the original 2. Craven himself is said to have disliked both of those sequels, feeling increasingly frustrated by his original vision's dilution as the series went on, with Matthew Lillard going as far as to say that he was miserable after Scream 4. So, when Radio Silence came on board and re-injected that self-awareness and tongue-in-cheek aspect into their 2 films, it felt like a real return to form and the spirit Craven wanted to portray. Scream 5 and Scream 6 both perfectly towed the line between doing the thing while critiquing the thing, but refusing to get pulled into the overindulgence of it all. Scream 7 dives headfirst into it again, having its cake and eating it too, leading to a confused and contradictory end product. The brilliance of the previous 2 Scream films in this franchise was that when it got right up to the points of giving you exactly what you wanted, it denied you exactly that. And that's what a Scream film should do. These are the anti-slashers. This is the stuff that used to make fun of giving people what they wanted in order to subvert expectations and do something fresh and new. That's all been lost, basically, with Scream 7. One vital element of Scream is its subversion of those expectations that it so gloriously pokes fun at as much as it leans into. It's so easy to look at the in-universe Stab franchise as a one-to-one direct representation of the Scream films, and while there's definitely elements of crossover in there, it's nothing unique to the Scream films. They're closer to representing Friday the 13th or Halloween, because the point of the Stab franchise is that it would never have the nuance, depth, or clarity of itself, or the horror genre to make the bold choices, self-referential jabs, and left turns that the Scream films make. The joy of the Scream formula is that it never gives you what you want or expect, and if it were to, it would fail as a franchise. If it reached that point, you may as well watch one of those movies it was born in response to that created the rules Scream seeks to break and transform. Hell, if it failed at this aspect, what would separate it from the Stab films? Again, it would fold in on itself and become the thing it is chastising. And that's where Scream 7 Falls. It is a stab film, a hollow impression of a Scream film that exploits the love people have for the originals while seemingly showing no desire to stay true to the unique nature of Scream that earned that adoration. Kevin Williamson, who's been involved in all of the Scream movies so far as a writer or producer, entered a shitstorm and evidently couldn't wrestle it back into anything resembling quality. The task was already tough enough as you're forced to abandon the much more interesting story and play in an entirely different toy box, but even that can't justify how dull and boring Scream 7 really is in its reversion to a status quo you'd already moved on from. It recycles meta commentary on legacy sequels that were done miles better in the prior two films, but leaning on its own self-awareness way too heavily as if it excuses anything that doesn't work, and that just isn't the case. The whole film plays like someone wrote Halloween 2018 from memory after one viewing and just randomly inserted ideas and tropes and trying to tie them together as best they can. It kind of makes sense if you squint, but upon further inspection, it just kind of feels like a hollow ripoff of what that film is. It's toothless, tame, and formulaic, the kind of slasher that would have been ripe for the original to have skewered 30 years ago. Williamson also directs, only his second directorial credit after his widely panned debut teaching Miss Tingle 27 years ago, and boy does it really fucking show, because evidently he hasn't gotten better, and this movie looks like ass. It looks really fucking bad. I mean, parts of it feel like a COVID movie and how empty the sets are and how empty the town is, and like the use of FaceTime and screens. It's just, oh my god, like it just feels like everything wrong with movies that were made during the COVID era or in response to the COVID era. It really just, there's a lack of production value going on here, and boy does it show. So yeah, I watched Scream 7. I put myself through this arduous movie so you didn't have to, because really, you shouldn't. This franchise struck gold with Scream 5, reinvigorating the franchise and making something that could be enjoyable for older fans of the originals, but also garnered most of its enthusiasm from Gen Z and young teens who have found a real connection to the series as a whole. In a world where studios are fighting tooth and nail for the attention of that particular audience, it seemed an increasingly baffling decision to disregard all the elements that brought that generation to the franchise and dragged it out of irrelevancy. Just snatch it away from them and pander to Gen X nostalgia and make it a dusty relic of the past once again. Just as Scream was proving it had a deserved place in the contemporary film landscape, it compromised its own longevity and esteem for the sake of a cynical bore fest that shows nothing but contempt for its predecessors and its fans who deserve better. And in order to appeal to older fans, this is the kind of move that kills franchises, when you don't invite young people in. And sure, this will likely make a ton of money riding on the Scream name alone, and it's already making records as the largest opening weekend for a Scream movie. But I'd urge you to vote with your cash and avoid a film made out of greed and spite, a story designed by fan outrage and political interference, not a filmmaker's true vision. While morally uncompromised movie studios are hard to find these days, invest in projects that promote new talent and original stories, not movies that abandon their stars for protesting a genocide and jangle 30-year-old characters in front of you as a distraction. Invest in horror that challenges you, that challenges convention and shows these studios that they can't get away with shoveling out creatively bankrupt slop forever. In what's arguably a golden age for horror, there's plenty of original films playing with some genre conventions to bring something new to the scene in the same way Craven did in the 90s. And look, even if you want a bit of a standard fun horror that does follow those conventions, the kind of movie Randy would have watched with his film student friends with a few beers, you can find those too. Who knows, by taking a chance on something different, something better, you might just find your new favorite scary movie.